Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. Chapters
right.
10 through the end.
Yep.
10, Parenting for Grit. 11, The Playing Fields of Grit. And 12, A Culture of Grit.
That's right. Parenting for Grit. I know the author talks a lot about how often she's asked, how do you do that? And I mean, over time when the grit thing kind of became more prominent.
You think I can sit like this?
I'm sure you can. Looks uncomfortable.
Okay, this is fine.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
It's working.
I would, kind of get the same kind of thing. And I think from a coaching standpoint, which I think will probably wind up melding parenting and the
Like
extracurricular.
environmental kind of support.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would hear coaches say all the time, kids are soft, they're not tough enough, and that you can't teach toughness, you can't teach.
Which we have said
grit.
before, we both wholeheartedly disagree with.
Wildly disagree. And you can't teach competitive spirit, all these things. And
How do those people get into coaching if that's what they believe?
I don't know.
I think you could still be a good coach in other areas of the coaching spectrum, but it's hard for me to think that you don't go into that environment with some intention of teaching things like that.
Some
Or
people,
that you're just going to get handed a team that already either has it or doesn't, and you just,
right,
that's your lot in
that was
that
very
year.
typical.
Like,
that was very typical. They were like, well, this crew, and it's true. Like everybody's falls into some different place on the toughness spectrum, and I know I still remember, well, I'll say that. Well, no, I won't. Janet Pressler, who played, she's a teammate of yours, and her dad was the Duke lacrosse coach when all, what broke loose.
Yeah.
And that kid was, I've never coached anyone tougher than her. I may have had one here, one there, who matched her, but no one ever. She dealt with that stuff. It was unbelievable.
And at a young age, too. Like,
yes.
It wasn't like she was 25 when this happened.
Right.
She was 14. Like,
yeah, it was. I remember there were so many times it was the most wrong I'd ever been. I remember when her mom called me the night before.
The most what you'd ever been?
Most wrong.
Oh. I heard most drunk, and I didn't think that was
nope.
really what you meant, but it was
Actually,
a weird context.
Never been.
Most drunk I'd ever been.
Yeah. Nope. Actually, I've never been drunk. But she called me the night before some of the players were going to turn themselves in or whatever, and asking me to watch out for Janet at school, and it was going to be terrible. And I'd already had multiple conversations with mom about all of this, and but I remember hanging up thinking, how bad's it going to be? How bad can it be? Meanwhile, it's like unbelievably bad. But she was raised by two people who were legit, real deal, tough, and great coaches in their own right. Her dad just got inducted into Lacrosse Hall of Fame. So, that she wasn't that way by accident. And I think, in the book, from a parenting standpoint, they talk about Steve Young, who great 49ers quarterback, and then they also talk about a British comic, Francesca Martinez, and they talked about different, in theory, how the styles of parenting were different. But then further exploration, she talks about it. They're both examples of what she calls wise parenting, kind of a combination of supportive and demanding. And
high warmth and high demand lead to the best outcomes for developing grit.
Nice.
I just read it off the outline, but
I know.
I'd specify.
I was sitting right here. I watched you do
Shut
that.
it.
So from a parenting standpoint, as with most anything else, the modeling really has impact. If you are showing that to your children on a regular basis, that you have passionate interests and that you model a persevering kind of mentality, then that sets a great example for
Right.
your children to follow. And I think that's
More so than
pretty.
like fostering a particular environment, like more the actions louder than words kind of deal, I guess. Like rather than trying to create an environment where they are exposed to things, like if you model that behavior,
Right.
that's where they learn those things from.
Yeah, and it's easy to like the famous example of Todd Marinovich, who was raised by dad to be this prototypical pro quarterback, and it was like boot camp and hard charging, from get go, him as a young boy, and it only lasted for so long before it kind of fell apart. And I think that's where sometimes parents, you can want it more than your kid to the point you overemphasize certain things. And I think that's where creating a supportive environment, like they have to want to do it.
Right.
And then if we just model the way we would like to see them act, boom, like
I almost
that's
think
where
of
it
like
kicks in.
supportive versus encouraging are often like seem synonymous, but I always feel like supportive is more like letting them take the lead a little bit and you're there and being supportive of that rather than encouraging them to go do something specific. Like this, unwavering support, balanced with tough love. Like, I've talked about my parents on here before. I really felt like I don't know if I would necessarily describe my parents as like tough love parenting, but there was just this is how you gotta you're responsible for dealing with things. I've given the example before of when I come home from practice and I'm like burnt out and I want to quit. Well, you can go tell coach. Also, they were supportive of everything along the way, and it was that good balance of maintaining my responsibility in the activity or in the environment, but supporting what I needed to maintain and be able to have that continuous passion and drive to keep that going.
Yeah, I think um, she uses the term psychologically wise, and I think that's a really
Yeah.
great term, where you're balanced and in all the right ways. So I really liked that. Like I said, I reread the book because we were going to talk about it, and I'd kind of forgotten that term. I was like, that is so gold. Like psychologically wise parenting. That's great. But I think that's where all of this flows into the coaching, teaching culture as well. This, the playing field of grit and the idea, like, I know for me, there wasn't a crossover when I was young. I couldn't have cared less about my schoolwork. My only goal was to not flunk out of high school,
Yeah,
which is not
just get
lofty.
by.
And but I was, passionate about other things. So all my energies went into that. In theory, we like to hope that there will be
Multiple
like if
avenues.
you learn how to be gritty here, then
You
it'll
can also do it here.
yes. And I think that's true. You just have to kind of want to.
I think it's important to also consider that, like, as a parent or as a coach, when you foster the environment of to teach them to be gritty and be tough and have perseverance and things in the home environment where things are very comfortable and safe, being able to do it in different types of environments when mom and dad aren't there or when someone familiar isn't there or when the situation is it's like practicing on a system drills in practice. Like you just have to be able to be dynamic in that trait of being gritty where it's not just okay when I'm in this specific environment I'm able to persevere and push forward and be that gritty personality. But the more as a parent or as a coach you expose kids to those different types of environments to practice it, that's building it along the way as well. It's not just here in the comfort of my home I know how to persevere through X, Y, and Z activities, but translating that into other environments where you don't have the exact same system in place.
Well, and that's, one of the huge benefits of extracurricular activities, and she talks about this at length in her book. Um, Sometimes it's difficult to get kids to be like passionate about their schoolwork.
Right.
Um,
I never was.
right. Um, Me neither. So that's where the whole combination of passion, perseverance kind of comes together in letting them experience both in an activity they are passionate about. That's why it's really important for parents to model passionately pursuing goals
Yep.
and things like that. And the same goes for coaches, teachers,
I think
mentors.
generationally speaking as well, things have evolved forward and backwards maybe of parents think they had to sacrifice everything for their kids versus saying, hey, like mom and dad still have things that we do that we're,
Right.
like I have book
Yeah.
club once a month, and for whatever reason, if I go anywhere else when it's just me, I don't take the kids. My daughter does not care, but when I go to book club for her, I think she knows it's a bunch of women getting together and like having a good time, and she like it drives her nuts. And I always just say to her like, hey, I'm allowed to have my
Right.
friends and my
Yeah.
things too. I don't go with you every time you have a friend over, or I don't always like just because I'm a mom. And yet, like, yeah, I'm never gonna tell her I don't love being with her, of course, but I still have those things that I do independently. I still love to sit and read for a while from time to time, and need the kids to go have their quiet time, because if everything I do is constantly just tending to them, A, it's not good for my own psyche, but B, it's teaching them that, it's not modeling that behavior of pursuing my own things that's gonna then encourage them to do the same.
I think sometimes too we have to remember as teachers and coaches. One of my early issues was self-control as a coach. I wanted my teams and players to be self-controlled, but I was not
Not.
terribly disciplined in that regard myself. Um, Learning that I need to model.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one point when Jason and Casey were coaching with us, and we were before I think it was before a state championship match, and we were so calculated, even about how we sat on the bench,
Yep.
and making sure we gave off this kind of vibe of we're good,
We're good.
we feel confident,
Yep.
and that stuff is important.
Well, it
And
translates to us as the
that's the whole
players. It
point.
translated to the
Yep.
other teams, and it sends a message, because I think when the coaches display that, then the players pick up on it and they do the same, and then that whole unit shows the other team or the other fans, and that is what you want to display of like we're all cool. Like, it's not just the coaches that
Yep.
got this, not just the players, but like as an entire unit, because the team is not it's not two separate entities. It is just one single. That's going to translate in a totally different way. Speaking of like the out of control thing, my daughter, whenever she's frustrated with me, she'll be like, oh, or she'll like do this, and it drives me insane.
Hmm.
And then we're in the car, and I find myself, I don't want to slap myself in the head, but like I'm constantly huffing at her. If she's irritating, like if she's like pushing my buttons, I'll be like, oh, and like I am displaying that
Yep.
lack of
She
control and
picked it
behavior, and
up.
so she's picked it
Yep.
up. And so while it's something that I can't stand that she does to me, every time I do it, I'm like, oh crap, like.
Yep.
So then it's a whole other conversation of being able to rein in our emotions and not always having to do that. But yeah, that environment of really, I mean, just modeling those things to your kids is so, like, they are. I mean, you hear people say all the time, kids are sponges. My God. Kids are
Yes.
sponges. Your players are
Yeah.
going to be sponges. Anyone where it's like a sort of superior subordinate type scenario, that has to be considered.
Well, I mean, that's what we talk about, like developing a culture, which will be the next chapter. I'm not ready to go right into that yet, but it's part of it. Like, I remember the first state championship match we won. I did not have any assistants that year, and I still was like, I knew kind of what I was doing, but I was in that situation before I was fully ready for it. I'll
Yeah.
say, um, but I remember I was so committed to looking in control and confident, and not giving off this vibe of nerves and
Yeah.
tension. And even though inside,
Totally.
total disaster.
Nuts.
But I remember uh, another team in a different state semifinal match. Their coach got ejected for yelling at officials. Just totally lost control. His team was really good, and he didn't have an assistant either. And
Oh.
so they had a parent come down and sit on the bench, and they wound up losing. And
Yeah, what that does to a team.
oh my goodness! So I was, doubly on notice
Mhm.
about, like, I want to give off a certain vibe and feel. And so when we went into the finals, this is back when it was side out scoring, so you had to be serving in order to score points. And we got down in the first two games. It was like one of them was 9-0, the other was 8-1, or maybe it was 9-1, 8-0. Regardless, we came back and won both games to 15, and I can still see like these young sophomores on the court and just not looking phased at all, despite the fact that they're in trouble. And if I have any contribution to that, because they were all really good players and much better players than I was as a coach, but I was making sure I gave off this,
Gave
like,
off
we're
that.
good, we're
Yeah.
chill, let's keep
Don't sweat it.
swinging, let's go. And the other team, man, they were falling apart, like yelling at each other. Coaches yelling at them. They're yelling at the coach, and it just was like a total collapse. And kids are crying, and
I mean, we talk about this all the time about, game day is not
got to feel good.
technical, not feedback.
Yep.
It's going to feel good. And I think you and I were texting. We were watching some game at the same time, texting about it. And I don't remember the specifics, but some coach was losing their mind. And you were like, I wonder what that's doing for the kids on the bench, like,
Yep.
or the court period, not just the kids on the bench. When you and Casey and Jason were doing that, did you guys like discuss?
Oh yeah.
Or
yeah,
because in my mind at the time, and I think I would now still perceive the same thing, like as individuals, that's just how each of you were.
No, we
But I
definitely
also
all
assumed that
talked
behind
about
the
it.
scenes
Yeah.
was like, this is how we're gonna.
Yeah, we have to model this, show this. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I was very lucky to have both those
Yeah, those were
gentlemen. Like,
really good personalities to have.
I always joked. I said these two guys, they both like were far more knowledgeable volleyball coaches than I was. I would joke I should be carrying the water. One of them should be the head coach, not me. But yeah, it was really systematic.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that from the moment I stepped in, because as a freshman on varsity, it's more so with Casey than anybody else, because he was sort of like the strategic
vocal.
nitpicker, if you will, is how I
yep.
like to put it. Kind of calling me freshman and like giving me the responsibilities of, but as much as, I mean, I don't even know if I should say as much as, because I don't really recall like taking any of that personally. I almost could feel his intentions behind it. Like, although the delivery was kind of like, not by any means he treated me like a peon, but it was sort of intended to sort of be that, like, you got to earn your keep here. But I also felt the strategy behind it of like, this is how this team works, and you've got to find your role regardless of if it's on the court or if it's shagging balls, whatever that looks like. And I never took it personally. So I do think there's also not only the environment that you create, but also the delivery is very important. When coaches are on the sidelines, throwing up challenge cards and freaking out, and like, that's not
right
productive.
It's not.
And your emotions are going to get heightened in those situations, but for the sake of,
well, especially with young people,
yeah.
Usually they're not fully formed, and you can rock the boat.
Yeah, hard.
So I think setting an example of acting the way you want to be, so that they'll act that way or see it's possible, and also just the sticking it out kind of example. Like, I know this is hard, but
yep.
And that doesn't mean you never quit anything, but you don't quit like in the season or
yep.
Things like that. And I think the more people we can have, like in kids' lives, modeling this kind of approach, of gritty, passionate / perseverance kind of model, the better chances we have. And I know in the conclusion she talks about, can you have too much grit? And she wasn't sure, but then she talked about, well, I haven't heard anybody coming home from work yet saying, gosh, everybody's so gritty, it's unbelievable.
You get too much. Get
typically that's not the issue. So I think then it's about, in this where we say we're right into culture, they're also connected. Surrounding yourself with people who do take a certain approach, a hopeful, optimistic approach, and we can do it. Let's go, as opposed to whining, complaining kind of thing. She talks a lot about a couple different programs. One of them was the guy who was CEO at J.P. Morgan Chase, and the almost super intense approach to grit and purpose, and this is who we are, and this is our identity. And same thing with Anson Dorrance talks in there a lot about the stuff at UNC. And one of the things I always really thought was super cool about what they did, they would have a series of core values and then a specific literary quote associated with each one, and then the players
like memorize and recite them.
Yeah, they had to memorize the quote and had to be able to recite it like on demand.
Yep.
But that was one way they didn't just pay lip service to this, but was trying to get it to become a part of who they were. And then after 4 years, they've all got like 12 of these really powerful quotes. And
that have now become part of who they are beyond.
Yes.
Yeah.
So um, I think taking measures to, like, it's easy to talk about it or whatever, but doing things that are going to make it a part of us, collectively. And
well, setting it to be the expectation, not just, I think when you set the standard that this is how we function as a group, this the grit is expected, you're gonna foster it even more, because when you set that standard of, I think especially at at the higher you get and higher levels where athletes are understanding expectations and wanting to meet the mark and things, I think that coaches can foster the expectation, which is very much how I felt on your teams. It was like, this is just how we do things. So like, either get on board or get out, kind of thing. And I mean, and that was never even said.
Right.
Like, it wasn't like, I mean, I don't think.
Our way, their highway.
I think I remember one incident, but it wasn't you, it was somebody else. But like, it was not said, but you could just feel it. Like, this is just how we do things. And if you want to be part of us, you do it. And the ones who were willing to stay on board, stayed on board. And the ones who didn't, they didn't come back the next year. I don't know. I think that's just.
I know one of the other examples she talks about, Dan Chambliss here, who had studied a bunch of swimmers. And, a lot of that process isn't intrinsically fun. You have to get up at 4 a.m. and go swim until you're exhausted. But she kind of came back to him because she talked about to him like chapter 3 or something, and comes back to him at the end of the book, and what else have you found out? And like, the easiest way, sounds counterintuitive, easy way to develop grit, but is joining a great team where you have a lot of company in this pursuit of excellence, this pursuit of toughness, and it's just more motivating when you look over and like, I think she used the example, if you go out for a run, it's much easier to stop at the 3-mile marker than everybody's going 5. I'm not going to be the one that doesn't go 5. We're going 5 miles. And that kind of, group approach, and you hear all the time, like, the 5 people you surround yourself the most with, all that stuff is real.
Yeah.
And if it's really hard to be gritty if it's just you every day.
I mean, some level of accountability is important.
And encouragement.
Yeah. Yep. We were, my friend and I, who were working out together in the mornings, the finisher yesterday morning was like 3 minutes of basically 3 extra ab exercises back to back to back. You just kind of AMRAP, basically keep going. And it basically took a whole minute to get through one round. And with like 20 seconds left, we were halfway through the second exercise. So we technically could have completed the third exercise. But we weren't going to get there based on the time. And we're doing it. And I said to her, I was like, we're going to finish this. And she's like, I knew you were going to say that, regardless of the way the clock goes. And so I think just that idea of, I go with her because she needs somebody to go with her to get the encouragement. And then also, like, I recognize, like, anytime, like, that's my mentality, is I would have by myself finished it or not. But like, encouraging people and pushing through. And now she's figured out, like, she knows how I'm going to be when it comes to those things. I'm not like screaming at her in the gym. I'm just kind of giving some guidance, and she's right there alongside of me. But just having those, I mean, even when I first started playing, I think I was 14 when I started playing, 13, maybe 8th grade. How old are you in 8th grade? 13?
Yep.
My first club team, I played my age group. And then the next year, I was like 2 or 3 years older than my age group. And my parents, I recall them hearing them talk to coaches about a little concern about me hanging out with like seniors when I was a freshman and this and that. Just the conversations, right? Like,
sure.
Just the maturity and the conversations that are happening with the freshmen and seniors or juniors. But all of my coaches at the time, and it was less of a concern with your team because we're all in high school together anyway, it didn't really make a huge difference, but the club teams traveling together and things. And the coaches said, like, putting her in this position with these older girls to compete is going to make her a better athlete. And my parents were like immediately on board. So I mean, they had the conversations with me, of course, about the things I might be exposed to with those older girls, but it wasn't like they weren't going to limit that exposure to that and the challenge that was going to make me a better athlete by saying, no, let's this year we'll play 15s and next year we'll play 16s. Like, I just continued to play up. And I really do think that helped build my character, build my maturity. And I ended up being like sometimes a leader on those teams, which was part of my personality. But also I think if I hadn't, it caused me to really push myself to insert myself in that situation, because physically speaking, most of those girls either had been playing longer or were just bigger or stronger or better. And so I had to find my way in those teams. And I think that was a huge contributor to just my personality, my mindset, and I guess my grit going forward into college.
Yeah, it's I know the culture chapter talks a lot about Pete Carroll and his time at the Seahawks, and he's got a great quote. He's talking to her, telling her to like
Angela Duckworth.
come, yeah, and says, "Come and watch us. All we do is help people be great competitors. We teach them how to persevere. We unleash their potential. That's all we do." And I just whatever, I loved it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like from a leader standpoint, that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, the parenting episode, parenting chapter is the first one of this. In the beginning, she's talking about like parenting and leadership are very similar, and that like you are encouraging to bring out the best in whoever it is that you're fostering that in. And so whether you are a parent, like don't skip the parenting chapter, right? Like understand what it means to be able to be someone who encourages and fosters that the best in other people, regardless of whether you actually are their parent or their coach. That is just the mindset to be in, where no matter who you interact with, you have that ability to try to bring out the best in them.
but it's not common.
No.
And that's, I mean, I know people who work in the business world, and it's just stunning, like the approach to leadership, which is almost the opposite of that quote I just read. And sometimes you're in a business and they're big enough to succeed regardless. But in terms of it being really powerful and meaningful and sustaining and just and in a way that you'll touch people and change people and make people's lives better, that kind of thing is such a huge part of the grit model, making your work like connect to your values, your personal mission, so that everything you're doing is in service to that. I mean, that's how this happens,
Right.
and there's no way you, over the long haul of your life, are just gonna constantly go right to the limits and push it and be the best version of yourself without it being attached to your ultimate purpose, your meaning for what you're doing, and that will always involve serving others. And that I know that's not a topic we've not discussed before on this podcast, but I beg people like do that work. Like it doesn't take forever, but reflecting on who you are, who you want to be, what is meaningful to you, what are your values. That is to me the foundation of moving forward in this pursuit of excellence. And if like that doesn't mean we're going to be gritty about everything. Like,
Sure.
if it's something that I don't think is a big deal,
Yeah.
all right, this
Put your all into it.
I'm bored and I'm not doing this anymore. But that's why it's really important to establish like this thing right here. This is a part of me,
Yep.
and I'm going to hammer this as hard as I can for as long as I can, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this all comes together, and that's if we conclude on anything, and you may have a zillion more things to talk about. I'm not
Just one.
meaning.
Not a zillion. We'd be here all day.
That's good. I know we'd have like a few more podcasts to throw in. That's to me. That's how this really works.
Yeah. I mean, I think in sports or any type of competition or performance, whether it's at sports or whether it's work, when you're a leader in that environment, if you want your players or your employees to give you their all and perform their best for you, you can't just demand that without some giving of yourself and reciprocating that, right? Like that service of others and support. And so whether like it's the athlete giving physical effort for your coach, the coach has to be giving that emotional support or that whatever it is you have to give back, that service of others, encouraging to do your best. It's if someone's constantly just like drilling you, like, and that is some coach's approach, right? Just to constantly berate you when you don't do the right thing. Sure, that might work the first couple of times where the kid's like, all right, I'm gonna figure this out. But at some point, you're like, this person just hates me. Like, I can't do anything right. And so, and maybe there are cases where people just can't ever do anything right. I'm sure there are. But I think in any environment when you are expecting people to give their very all for you or for the good of the team or for the win or the revenue, whatever that looks like, you have to find a way to be giving yourself and servicing to them so that it is a reciprocated, whatever. relationship.
Yeah, and they talk about Earl Thomas, who played on those Seahawks teams, a great player, and talk about if I had to pick one player, he would be one of the players I would pick that exemplified everything we're talking about. But then when he was asked about it, he talked about how all his teammates helped him do all that, and how powerful it was to be all in this together with these like-minded men striving for the same goal or goals, and then love was part of the conversation, and especially nowadays, it used to. There are a lot of options besides whatever activity you're involved in. So if it's not an environment that you want to be a part of, well, then I'll go do something else. So I don't want to be for me, I don't want to be the reason someone decides to go do something else because I was not treating them in a psychologically wise way.
Right.
So I think that's where we are. And I know it's weird. I was listening to a different podcast and they brought up Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book in that podcast, totally unrelated to this one, and about what a impactful book that was on so many people, right from the get-go. And I thought, you talk about grit. The guy survived 3.5 years in Nazi concentration camps, and the whole reason he was able to do it because he was passionate about this purpose. I'm going to write this book again that they destroyed when I walked in here, and this higher, better version of ourselves is always that's what we should be chasing.
Here, and I'll never forget my freshman year. And listen, I didn't go to a school where we're having press conferences regularly by any means, but we were sort of trained on sort of how to answer questions and always in support of the team, in support of the coach, and But when you watch post-game interviews with athletes, especially at professional higher levels or very high elite college levels, and you hear the interviewer saying oh, you had you scored this many points tonight and you broke a record in this, almost always you hear that player come back and say, well, I owe it all my teammates and my coach.
Right.
And yes, they are encouraged to not always just yay me, good job, but you have to know that at those levels that is how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not relying on your teammates and finding the support that I couldn't, sure, I may have been the star of the game that night, but I couldn't have done it without my coaches and my teammates. To always be able to give back the credit, not just always be the star of the show, is something that I think it's no mistake that you see regularly. Now, there are certain people who don't always follow that, and maybe not everyone's going to be there, but at those high levels, that is the relationship and the appreciation that the entire unit has for one another.
Yeah, and I think at that level, if teams don't have a culture like that, you just don't get away with it for long. Yeah. And plus, it's just not a rewarding, meaningful, inspiring way to go about our business. Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah. So
don't let the wheels fall off.
Nope. Put the work in. Know who you want to be. Know what you want to accomplish. And then you can figure out how to get there. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.